And I'm assuming that some folks will maybe come in and join us. Thank you for joining us. It's good to see all of you today. Both Commissioner Frohr and Mayor Wynn, Chair and our Vice Chair, are not able to be here, so you get me for a little while. And so I just wanted to, I think it's a benefit for all of us if we can just quickly go around the room, and then we'll go online to introduce ourselves and just let everybody know maybe your name and where you're from. And then Rosie, maybe I'll have you help me out with the folks that are coming on and offline there. So, all right. And if you want to start, since you're at the end, Rosie, and we'll go from there.
Rosie Hernandez with WFRC.
Andrea Pearson with WFRC.
Ginger Chin with the Salt Lake Chamber.
Rick Bullion, Salt Lake Community College.
Lane Thackrell, Morgan County Commissioner.
Andrew Gruber with Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Marsha White with Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Megan Townsend, Wasatch Front Regional Council.
You have to do, and you have to hit the, yeah.
Muriel Xochimel, X Factor Strategic Communications.
Laura Hansing, Governor's Office of Planning and Budget.
Alex Chammer with Camoin Associates.
Sarah Anderson with the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget.
Guyla Tender with UAMI.
To Linda Larson with UAMI.
Elvon Farrell with the Economic Development Corporation of Utah.
Jared Stewart, Tooele City, on behalf of Mayor Wynn, and luckily they didn't make me do the meeting or anything. So thank you,
Next
Marsha.
time, Jared. Why don't we go back real quick, Byron?
Byron Head, WFRC.
Miranda Jones Cox, WFRC. Chrissy Dahlberg, WFRC.
Kirsten Swinyard from Salt Lake County on behalf of Jevin Gibb.
Yeah, you can sit at the. And then if you want to go through on the line, that's easier for you.
Perfect. We have Abby Hunsaker, Alan Matheson, Amanda Tullis, Ashley Jensen, C. Oliver, Carrie Fullerton, Eden Johnson, Holland Wilbanks, Jason Godfrey, Kent Anderson, Mark Nold, Paul Drake, Susie Becker, and Ted Knowlton.
Marsha, can I just say for our folks that are online, thank you for joining us. Of course, it's always the challenge. I'm looking into my computer so that the folks online can tell I'm looking right at them right now. It's a challenge to do a hybrid meeting. We're going to pay attention to hands raised or to the chat because we want you to be fully engaged in the meeting that we're having here. Okay, so please feel free to contribute, to speak up, and we'll do the best job we can to pay attention. Note, if you put something in the chat, not everybody in the room is going to see it. So we'd rather just have you speak up, and we encourage you to do so. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. I think we had a couple others that joined. Looks like Chris is online, Chris Roybal. There's a Zoom user. I'm not sure who that is. Eden, I don't know if we said Eden Johnson. And did I hit everybody? Looks like it. All right, with that, we have just a couple of really quick items. I don't know if you picked up an agenda as you walked in the door, but we have a couple of quick items to go over, and then we are basically turning the time over to our statewide friends here. So if we could, we have an action item, and it's the approval of the May 24th meeting minutes. I'm sure you all read those, and really somebody wants to make a motion to approve them. What's that? Yep, we've got a quorum. Yep. We approve the minutes. Okay. May 24th. I know it's a long ways back, but of 22, thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second, someone? Ginger, okay, thanks. All right, motion by Commissioner and second by Ginger. All in favor, say aye. I assume. Any opposed? All right. One thing that we didn't get on the agenda that I would just really like to quickly announce, because we're moving through it quickly. If Rosie, if you could just pull up that quick presentation for me. So we are about ready to, I think I've been trying to be really clear on, and hopefully I'm being clear enough. I've been trying to be really clear on what the state is doing versus what we're trying to do. Our 5-year SEDS is up here. We will have to redo it. I think most of you know that. And we are about ready to launch into sending out an RFP. And so I just wanted to show you quickly what our thoughts are. This is still in draft, but just our thoughts on what we're going to be doing here in the next probably couple of weeks. If you just want to go to the next slide real quick. So we have a timeline set starting in October. We figured October seemed more reasonable than the last 2 weeks in September. So we have a timeline set for 7 different phases. And it will go from October until September. We're going to look at more on analytics side from now until about middle of January, February, and then we're going to start into public engagement about in March. And so trying not to overlap too much with what we're doing on the state side, but we need to continue to do that. So I just wanted to show you our timeline again. If you want to just hit the next slide. The EDA makes us do this as part of to be an EDD. So these are the 5 different areas that we will include in the SEDS. And then if you want to just go to the next slide. We've really, I know there's a lot of words on this, but there's I kind of want to do this a little bit different than we've done before. Really looking at goal setting, what's our situation, current situation through a SWOT, do a strategic plan, more with forward thinking and not necessarily all the things that we've been doing, but what's coming up, capacity building. And then I put in this foundational progress because I think it really is a benefit that we include some of the information that we're getting out of, and I just keep calling it the statewide SEDS. I apologize because it's a very long name, but some of the strategies that come out of that. Also to try to include some of the things that are coming out of the UEOC, the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission. With that, is there one more slide in there? I can't remember. We've come up with a scope of work. We will be including a scope of work in identifying issues and strategic, like a strategic framework around the scope of work. But that will be coming shortly and sending out as an RFP to our consultants. So that's it with that.
I do want to say something. Thanks. You, Marcia, you said sort of respectfully, like we're trying not to overlap too much with the statewide vision. And I might sort of flip it and say that in some ways we are really intentionally trying to overlap with the statewide vision, which is part of the point of today's meeting. In fact, and Laura, you might comment now or just talk later as you were already planning to do, but part of the whole point of having the statewide vision is to take the work that's done at the regional level and integrate it as part of what the state's overall strategies are for economic opportunity and economic vision. So it's great that these things are happening at the same time. And I'll just note also that Laura and I have actually been coordinating a sort of a quasi legislative committee. I say this because it's under the auspices of the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, which was state created. And then there's a Growth and Transportation Working Group. And then there's a Regional Growth Alignment subgroup of that working group. So lots of meetings for people who like to go to meetings. Laura and I are co-leading that group. And one of the items that emerged out of that dialogue was actually trying to ensure that that coordination is happening. And so I'd say if we thought, I don't think we think, but if we thought that some legislation was needed in any way, or we wanted more support from state leaders to promote that integration, then we could have that. But just generally speaking, it's just great that we have this attempt to synchronize the work at the local level, city, county, region, state, so that we're all pulling in the same direction. And, you know, Ginger, you're nodding. You have to think about the whole state as really the statewide chamber, and we all have to do that coordination. So anyway, Laura, if you want to say something now, I'm sure you'll talk more as we go. You'll wait. Okay, thanks.
And I want to mention that this is a really important step from the EDA. And in fact, we got a little bit of press the other day. Catalyst Campus was able to secure an EDA grant of $676,000. And if it hadn't been part of the SEDS, our current SEDS, they would not have been able to. Well, they might have been able to, but it'd be a lot more difficult to secure that funding. And so it's a really important piece. And I think it's important for businesses and other higher educational institutions and such to be part of this, because if we don't touch all of those bases and you go to try to apply for some money through the EDA, it'll be really a lot more difficult to get that. So.
Do you want to take a few more seconds and tell us just a little more about that grant award?
Sure.
Because it's cool.
It is cool. So $676,090, just so you know, was a grant from the EDA to Catalyst Campus. And they are a company out of Colorado Springs that are actually moving into the Ogden area. I'm sure the Guy and Talinda probably know more as well. And they are, and I'm going to botch this because I'm not very good at doing what Catalyst Campus is very good at their elevator pitch. But basically what they do is they take entrepreneurs and innovators, and they take them, like for instance, software engineers, and they take them off of like Air Force bases. So Hill Air Force Base, for instance. So, you know, a lot of times it's difficult for people to get behind the gates. And so these folks are working with entrepreneurs and innovators and software engineers to work directly with the Air Force Base, but not necessarily on campus, but they're working off campus. And so they're creating cool spaces for them to do software engineering. And did I do okay there? Is that, yeah.
And to foster entrepreneurship, that's the main focus, is to create an incubator environment to be able to feed the innovation of entrepreneurship into Hill Air Force Base.
And Nisa is on our board as well, and it would be easier for her to describe what we do or what they do. But it was fun to get a shout out from the EDA and just say it wasn't possible without Wasatch Front Regional Council's being a designated EDD. So it was kind of fun to see that happen for us. So how's that?
Great. And we've been joined by a few folks. Shannon, Edward, would you introduce yourselves, please?
I'm Shannon Ellsworth. I work for Rio Tinto. I'm on the land and water team at Rio Tinto,
And,
and I'm happy to be here.
And
and
And I live in a city that's not exactly part of WFRC. But,
Shannon is a member of the city council in Provo. I don't know why you're, okay, fine, thank you. Okay.
and Edward.
I'm Edward Bannon with the Swazo Business Center. I'm the Director of Business Development for the center. We are a nonprofit on the west side of Salt Lake City, working in economic development for minority business owners.
All right, now that's welcome and introductions. We'll try to, any public comment? Sometimes we have the public here. Very rarely do we have the public here. Sometimes. All right, well, we're going to move right on because I think Des Moines has a lot to talk about today and we're excited to hear. I think many of you might have taken the survey, so I think you're going to, hopefully you're going to give us an update to that. So I'll turn the time over to Laura and her team.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you for having so much time on your agenda for us today. We really appreciate the opportunity to visit with everyone and get feedback. I'm going to start at the very beginning, just in case folks need a refresher on what we're working on or if you're new to this group. So, and some of this may be a little bit of a repeat of what Marcia just presented, but so every association of government is also wears the hat of an economic development district or EDD as a requirement to receive federal funding from the Economic Development Administration. Each EDD needs to develop a document called a CEDS, a Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, which is the RFP that Marcia was just talking about hiring for. And so there are 7 different regions around the state. Each one has their own CEDS document. At the same time, on kind of the other bookend, so that's really at the regional level. And of course, going lower to local governments, you all have your own plans as well. On the other bookend, there is the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, which is co-chaired by the governor, the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, and also includes representatives from local governments, EDC Utah, the school board, various different folks and cabinet members. The Economic Opportunity Commission last year developed a document called Economic Vision 2030. Sorry, of course I get a frog in my throat, right, as I'm trying to talk. It's the chocolate. So they developed this document called Utah's Economic Vision for 2030, and it's very high level, right? Necessarily, it's got these strategies like we want to be a startup state, really high level strategies of where the state would like to focus its efforts. So we've got this at the top. We have the regional documents within each of the EDDs, and we're trying to bring those together in some way. And so the state received a grant from the Economic Development Administration for some funding, and they had a specific scope of work of things that we could choose that we wanted to do. The majority of that funding is going directly to the EDDs. Each one gets $100,000 to, do the work that they need to do. But we reserve some of the grant to develop essentially a statewide CEDS, which I think is a perfect name for it. We've got a much more complicated official title, which I think statewide CEDS. We're just going to call it that. And so the idea behind this is to roll all of those regional documents up, take the high level state strategies down, and really make sure that they're speaking to one another. And then we're speaking to one another across regions as well. So Wasatch Front Regional Council's EDD is speaking to MAG, which is speaking to BRAG, for example. And so we're looking for commonalities between the different regions and ways that we can leverage one another. This week, as I've been describing this process, you've probably all heard the phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats. We want to elevate everybody with this, and we think sometimes by working across regions and as a state as a whole, we have the opportunity to help out each different region around the state. So we issued a request for proposals as well. Every EDD, Marcia represented WFRC. Every EDD had somebody help us make that selection. We received a bunch of really phenomenal proposals, and we selected Camoin Associates, and Alex is here from there. Her counterpart, unfortunately, is flat in bed with potential COVID, and so we've got the most important person here, though, but usually there's two of them, but Alex is the one who's doing all the work anyway, so we got the better end of the stick. And so in May, at your last meeting, we came here and we had just kind of an open conversation about what is this region trying to do? And really we were asking, how are you using the SEDS document? And this is not a slight to WFRC or to anyone else, but kind of across the board, across the state, we found that the SEDS was really sort of a check the box exercise to allow us to get that federal funding. And we think that there's a lot of potential there. And so we're hopeful that with the statewide planning effort, it will bolster and elevate the role of the regional SEDS so that you can be a little bit more, use it in a more strategic way and help the region be even more successful. So in May, we came and talked about that. Since that time, we, and by we, I mean Alex, has been doing an awful lot of research trying to evaluate how Utah stacks up against other states in the nation, and then also breaking it down how different regions within the state stack up against one another. And so we are here to share some of those findings with you. But primarily our goal is not to have a presentation and talk at you, it's to have a conversation with you. And so we'll share this data. We'd really hope to have a robust conversation about, you know, what jumps out at you in this data. Where do you see opportunities where we're doing a great job already as a region that we can do even better? We can build on those successes, or maybe some areas where, you know, we're kind of falling behind a little bit. How could we put more efforts into those to help elevate that? And then we want to talk about all the great opportunities that are happening within the state, like the Point and the Inland Port and the great work that UAMI is doing in this new incubator process or facility. I mean, we really want to get into that, what the universities and technical schools are doing, all the ways that we can leverage our resources here. So with that overview, I'm going to pass it over to Alex, and Rosie's I think going to pull up our slides and we'll walk through some of this finding, and then we'll have a good discussion. And feel free to just jump in at any point if you see something that you're like, that doesn't make sense to me, or I question that, or here's a thought that comes to my mind. Just please chime in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Laura. And I will try to speak to, again, the virtual and in-person group that we've got here, but I see lots of familiar faces from our first meeting. I think Laura did a good job setting up the goals of today. Thank you so much. So I am going to skip right over the agenda. We know what we are setting out to do. Before we get into some of the data, I do want to point out one of the other things that we are putting together and that has actually launched, that Marsha mentioned, was this statewide business survey. So this has been out for a couple weeks now. Have people seen this? I know it's gone out through the chambers and things. Great. Okay. I see a lot of head nods. That's great.
It may look a little different than what you said.
Yes. Yeah. We did some sprucing up to the marketing. So to be honest, the number of responses that we have gotten is not as high as we might have thought thus far. So we're going to hope maybe to push it out, do a second round, since we've been on the ground this last week and gain some familiarity about the process and the survey and things. So we might send that around to the group again, just to do one more push. I believe in our initial communication, we did say that there was a closing date. You can be sure to say that you can disregard that date. You know, we want to make sure that we've got a substantial number of results before we start to analyze. I can see some of the initial results so far. I think most interesting, about 20% of our responses thus far are from women-owned businesses. So that's just sort of an interesting, you know, one of the things that we're measuring. The other thing too that I think is interesting for the AOG, as you're doing your SEDS process, that all of this data is going to be collected by region, so that we'll be able to break out specifically, you know, from Wasatch Front, certain business characteristics, and we're happy to share all of that information with you as well. So, you know, the more responses we can get, the more representative, small, large, medium-sized businesses, right? We want all of those voices. Anything else in the context of the survey? All right. Yeah, go ahead.
So I know that you sent it to us at the chamber, but have you sent it out to the business resource centers across the state? What's been your reach and how
Sure.
can we help get the reach more just
Yeah.
beyond our business members at the chamber?
Yep, so the chambers have been a great help. I know at the state level, working with the specific industry associations, so that it's gone out through that, but I don't think the business resource centers might not have been on the list.
I'll make a note of that and we'll follow up.
Good.
Sorry. I should have also mentioned, we're working very closely with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity on this planning effort. They're not here with us today, and somehow GOPD is the one who's managing the contract for this, but we're very, very close partners on that. And we've been kind of relying on them to help us know who to send it out to. But I will make a note of that and we'll follow up with them on it. Thanks, Ginger.
So are you planning on also, I mean, the survey is partially done or it's not done?
The survey is out. We're collecting responses on it. We had hoped to be able to have survey data to share with you today, but the response rate has been pretty low. I think we have 40 responses from the Wasatch Front Regional Council area. We're hoping for more like 500, and so we're working on it. But we'll be able to share that with you when it's coming.
Well, I guess I could put it on the websites and maybe that's something you could do is have it on each one of the different individuals, the different types of people and have it on their communications package or something.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I've talked to a lot of local governments and they've said, we have a list of businesses in our county and we'd be happy to share it with them. So that kind of support would be very helpful. We really appreciate it. We'll get the link out to through Marcia to everyone after this meeting. Thanks.
Great. All right. So in addition to the survey then, I'll just get back to this big picture. I think this is a little bit of a visual representation of, Marcia, what you were describing in the beginning, right? Sort of how the AOG SEDS are working within and with Utah's Coordinated Action Plan, which is essentially the statewide SEDS. What we're going to talk about today in terms of the data is what we're calling the fundamentals of economic prosperity, right? There's going to be different opportunities across all of the regions that we are visiting this week, essentially for any of those opportunities to take off, right? They've got to be supported by some foundational elements, whether that's infrastructure, innovation, intellectual capital. We'll get into what all of those categories are, but you've got to have those foundational elements. And so what we did was took a look at the national scale, look at how Utah stacked up across the country, and then looked at the individual AOG scale as well. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, get some reactions to. Obviously, we've got these conversations on the ground that are adding a little bit more nuance to the data. You guys, know the region best, and that's why it's so important that we are here in person to have these conversations. Ultimately, we hope that this data, these conversations help support the SEDS, and I know that's just getting off the ground, and then ultimately help the state level and the regional level talk to each other throughout the lifespans, the 5-year lifespans of those documents. All right. So in terms of how we set about this data, right, we've got to get our heads around economic development opportunities for the entire state. And that's going to, fuel a whole range of things. So in order to, start someplace and think about, okay, what do all of these opportunities need to have to take off, right? We're calling these the fundamentals of economic prosperity. And so this was really pioneered by Dan Gunderson, my colleague who couldn't be here today. So I will try and do this justice, but in his work across 4 states in the course of his career, these are the things, the elements that came together that really helped put a framework around thinking about, what councils like this are able to do in their backyard to fuel those economic opportunities. So we've coined these the 6 I's. You can tell some of these are a little bit more obvious than others. So I'll just go through and quickly describe how we are thinking about each I. Infrastructure, perhaps that one is a little bit more tangible, right, than some of the other ones. So here we're talking roads, water, sewer, broadband, clearly a essential infrastructure element. It's really a non-negotiable for education, personal use, business use, right? That has to be included. And then housing as well is included in infrastructure. Innovation, I mean, just talking about that EDA award is a perfect example, right? We're looking at how opportunities like that, how the entrepreneurs that grow in those amenities, incubators, accelerators, right? How that knowledge is therefore then transmitted into the community, into business opportunity, right? Are they then able to scale up and hire and grow their business and turn that innovation into business potential? Intellectual capital, very related to innovation. Think about it a little bit more wider scale in education. So think about kindergarten right up until post-secondary school, looking at really performance, quality, availability, and what that looks like across different regions. International. This one looks at a couple different angles, both in terms of the population itself, right? How much of the population is foreign born, and we'll see that in some of the indicators, but then also from a business side, right? How much of the total economy is made up of foreign direct investment, so FDI, how the degree to which foreign dollars are flowing into the state or the region, depending on which indicator we're looking at, and what impact does that have on the economy. Interest. This one is a little bit interesting to try and quantify, right? Interest is, think about it as quality of life, but a little bit more nuanced than that, right? You know, sometimes the places that we want to be, visit, work, live, play, right? There's just a certain factor that we know that we enjoy. So we tried to put some quantifiable indicators around that. Think about this too from both perspectives, both on the visitation side. So the types of amenities that might bring a visitor to a region, outdoor recreation clearly being one of the strengths of the entire state or much of the state. So the visitor side, but also the resident side, right? There's clearly going to be overlap in some of those amenities. Some are not though. And so think about that from those two perspectives. And then lastly, investment. Essentially how attractive is either the state or the region to that business investment. Think commercial, and a couple different indicators there that we'll see on the next couple of slides. So again, big picture, we're looking at evaluating each of these I's, and we'll see that at the state level first.
So Alex, a real quick
Yes.
question.
Go ahead.
So on the investment side, you're talking more about the investment from the business coming into the state, not necessarily the incentive of the state to the business, I guess. Is that what you're?
Correct, yes. The other thing that would be, I believe is in, which one is it in, international or investment? So it would be looking at exports, right? So the exports that are the things that are made either in the state or the region, how much of that is leaving that area? So yes, attractiveness for that investment. And so just a little bit of a key to the next couple of slides. You'll see the topic that we're talking about at the top. The number that you see at the top is going to be Utah's rank out of the US total. That is 50 states and the District of Columbia, hence 51. And then on the map, you'll see the darker the color, the lower the score, and that's going to get you the better ranking. So think golf rules. Lower score that's in the map is going to get the better ranking. It'll make more sense once we get to the
Did
slide.
you say these rankings are Camoin rankings?
Correct. Yep. So
Okay.
that's a good point. So this is a 100% original index that we have created for this process. All of these sources are publicly available sources. The time frame is, we took the most recent available data per indicator. I would say the average is about 2019. So clearly that's right, going to have implications in the data that is reflected, But the idea being, right, if this ends up being, I think it is quite valuable to look at the state level or regional level, to be able to look at this maybe say every 5 years. You'll really be able to see some of the jumps, I imagine specifically at the regional level as well. All right, so the first of the 6 I's here, and feel free to chime in once. I know it takes a little bit to let this all sink in, but so on your right-hand side, you can see the indicators that went into this particular I, so infrastructure. So you could see at the top there, right, the share of households that are cost burden, for example. So the share of households that pay more than 30% of their income to either mortgage or rent, whichever one they do. Also included looking at broadband. That would include both speed and availability in terms of providers, the condition of roads, the condition of bridges, water stress, and then commercial aviation activity as well. So you can see there that Utah is 13th out of the nation in that sort of second tier of blue on the map there.
One comment on this one too, you know, I think we're pretty proud of our infrastructure investments in this state. But this, as Alex just shared, that this one does include housing as well. And so some of the reason that we're in a little bit lower scoring here could be that we've just been growing so rapidly that we haven't completely kept up with some of the infrastructure needs as with a growing population. So housing, for example, we're falling behind a little bit on that.
That's a good
Just
point.
a clarifying question.
Yeah, of course.
So just for my own data analysis, because I'm at an elementary level here, North Dakota is doing better than Utah and Arizona is doing worse than Utah. Am I reading that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. And so that brings up sort of a good point about population too, right? So we chose, all of these are weighted equally across the board too. We decided to just weight it equally. And then, right, population in some case, concentration of population and just overall population in some cases is just going to have a major effect, right, on some of these indicators. However, we tried to take into account whether it's per capita or by GDP to account for, right, population discrepancy so that it's not all totally driven by population. Although obviously that's going to have an impact across some of the indicators.
Any other? Yeah, just another point of clarification. These are very different types of indicators. So the ranking here, as I understand it, would be that Utah is 13th nationally out of 51.
Right.
Do you guys have the data kind of, fleshed out per indicator as well?
Yep,
Okay.
we do. Yeah. So we've got, well, so for the state level, yes, we've got certainly the individual indicators, and then essentially that combines to make a composite score that you see there. But yes, right, one could be right at the top of the ranking maybe, and then one is much lower, and then this is the combination of those.
So that's also part of your report. You're just not showing it here.
Correct. Yeah, we do have the back end. Yep.
And I'll build on Muriel's comment. It's really important because obviously the whole point of this work is for us to figure out what do we do going forward.
Right.
And we might be, actually not might, we are, our bridges are in the best condition of any state in the nation, at least according to most rankings.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what they are here because it's not clear. And then I don't know exactly how housing, water stress is defined, but we have water challenges. We have housing
Absolutely.
affordability. And so we might say, well, we're pretty good on infrastructure, but our bridges are in good shape, but we've really got to do something about water. So we've got to, I presume we'll parse these to determine what actions need to be taken going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Can I make one more quick comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm seeing roads percent acceptable and then a travel time metric. Is transit factored in anywhere here?
Transportation, yeah, and transit has actually come up a couple times, and that was not something, I mean, I guess you could sort of say it might be included in travel time to work, but not public transportation availability per se. It would be
Okay.
more in the travel time to work.
That might be an interesting metric to look at because I
Mhm.
think one of the infrastructure strengths we do have is getting out ahead of
Yeah,
a transit network.
good point.
Or just one last
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
So then do you also have this geographically based throughout Utah? Because, okay.
Yep. That's a good preview, and we've got some handouts, but yes, after the statewide set of these, we've got them at the AOG level and at the county level. All right, let's jump ahead here. All right, so innovation. Utah falls quite a bit higher in this one, 5th out of the nation. And again, example that we just talked about at the beginning, right, with the EDA grant and the accelerator incubator, right, is a perfect example of bringing those types of resources. So you can see again on the right, anything from patent technology diffusion index. Again, so just basically whether the technology that is growing and being fostered at universities, tech colleges, is making it into the community. Average share of high-tech employment in terms of overall employment. You can see the incubators per million workers. And then again, that last indicator there, income from licensed research per establishment. So all sort of related to that ecosystem at universities and colleges. Oh yes, one thing to just to qualify here, the indicator that's establishment births to deaths ratio, that is not population. We know where Utah would fall in that. This is business creation essentially. So our businesses being created faster than they are closing. Just to keep in mind there. So you can see Utah in the darkest blue there at the top quartile. Correct. Yes. Not population related. All right, I'll keep going here and we can chat about these as a whole, maybe. Did I turn it off? Can you just? Thank you so much. All right, intellectual capital, obviously quite related to innovation. So it sort of makes sense that it falls in a similar spot, 7th out of the entire country. You can see again in that dark blue in the top quartile there. Indicators on the right, you can see account for a wider span of educational institutions. So average 8th grade proficiency, school accountability, average STEM degree creation by population, occupational diversity percentile, essentially how diverse are the jobs, in this case in the state. That one has come up quite a bit in our conversations across the regions. And then the share of the population with a bachelor's degree or higher. And I should say too, we did go back and forth on this one a little bit, right? Whether to include associate's degrees as well. Obviously the associate's degrees and tech certificates are so important to many of the jobs for today and right our next generation, but decided to stick with bachelor's here in the indicator, but acknowledge those importances as well. All right, I'll get the hang of this eventually. All right, interest. Again, so sort of an interesting one to try and quantify here. You can see the indicators on the right, looking at the investment in the arts. So the average amount of grants from the National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for Humanities per capita. That next one down is pretty interesting, the social capital index. So essentially trying to quantify how connected a person feels to their community, right? So whether that is through a religious organization, a nonprofit, their school, another community group, right? We wanted these not just to, right, take into account very strict economics or business related, right? These social capital and connectiveness indicators play such a role in right, business location decisions as well. And so this would also take into account spending for outdoor recreation and then arts, entertainment, and accommodations as well as share of total gross domestic product.
Quick question on that.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, sorry, I keep
Yeah.
talking.
Okay.
But did you guys look at the Utah Foundation's work on social capital? They've recently released an entire series specific to Utah with all kinds of
Right.
metrics on social capital.
Okay, yeah, I believe this, the social capital index was actually part of the work that Senator Mike Lee was doing at the federal level. So that's where some of the social capital index is taken, but that statewide work would be great.
So Senator Lee's suggestion was that the taking part in a demonstration leads to an indicator of community health. That would surprise me if that was his suggestion.
I think it's part of a joint committee on
Okay.
a few
That
others
was
might
just
have
a little
had
tongue-in-cheek joke, okay, just
some
for the
input
record.
into that.
Can I ask a question from the
Yeah.
remote world?
Sure.
This is super interesting. Thank you. And I was, forgive me if you said this, but can you give us a sense of how did you select these particular indicators? Is there, for example, some research, some write-up that sort of correlates what you selected with the attractiveness of a place, to skilled labor? Is there some kind of, I think you understand my question, some rationale for it? It's, and I'm not saying it's not intuitive. I was just wondering if there was some basis in addition to the intuitive nature of these indicators.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we sort of came at it from a couple different perspectives, but right, a little bit from the business and site selection perspective. And so, right, there's sort of typical standards or indicators that site selectors or businesses would look at. But then again, we wanted to expand that a little bit beyond sort of those typical indicators and look at whether that's social or community based. So the short answer is yes, we've got some rationale behind, each of these in the process that we went through to eliminate, to say, yes, no, let's include that. That certainly would be included in a narrative as part of the report. Just can't quite get through today.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I think we had another question.
Yeah, kind of related to that question, just wondering if there are indicators for economic opportunity or economic mobility within our area, and if so, where are they reflected in your eyes?
For economic mobility, I don't think explicitly would have been included in these, although you could probably make a case for some combination of them, but that's another good comment in terms of even under, it could fall under many of these, but that's a good point to think about where that might fit in.
And our state has been rated very highly historically for economic mobility, right?
Right. All right, I'll keep moving here so we can get to the regional view as well. Thank you. All right, investment. So Utah, 7th in the country here, again, in that darkest blue. Some of the indicators on the right there, you see the 504 and 7A loans. Those are small business administration loans. So, right, those are important to flow into the community, into the business community, right, to have the ability to either start up, scale up, whatever might be the case for that particular business. That Community Reinvestment Act loans, those are specific loans to low and moderate income businesses. And then those last two indicators there, you can see refer to non-residential construction and the value of that new construction permits per capita. So I think we would probably all expect this one to rank quite high based on the amount of growth, certainly in the last 5-10 years. All right, and international, our last I, 18th here out of the country. And so you can see a couple of the indicators there. Again, whether it's foreign direct investment as share of total gross domestic product, whether it's exports, share of exports per GDP, or again, looking at the population as well. So the percent of foreign born.
I see Christina Oliver's got her hand raised online.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead, Christina.
Thanks, Laura. Can you all hear me? I've been having trouble with my camera system today.
You sound great.
Okay, so quick question on these numbers. Are you pegging them to the population? For example, the investment, the small business loans, it's much different in Utah, of course, than it is in a state with, 10 times our population. Is that factor taken into account when you're coming up with these rankings and percentages?
Yes, yeah, and that's a good question. It is taken into account to make sure that it is not overly, to take into account that states that have higher populations are not overly represented. That was, while each of these are accounted, each of these are weighted equally, that the population was accounted for in these indicators.
And I apologize, I don't understand that. So if it's weighted, it's taken into account, but it's not weighted. You're saying it's a factor, but it doesn't affect the output. Is that what you're saying?
So yeah, this is on me trying to explain it. So I guess when I say that none of the indicators are given any extra weight than others. So each indicator is worth, just say 1. But if we wanted within those indicators, if we needed to adjust for population by state to make sure that it was represented more equally, then that was taken into account in the analysis. Is that clear as mud?
It does. I guess I'd go back to what Ted was, referring to earlier is the methodology.
Sure. Yep.
Because that can drastically skew the results if it's depending on how it's weighted and the input into the model. So I'd be very curious to see that.
Yes. Yep. Thank you.
One other comment just on this international metric. Some of this is just a matter of where the state of Utah sits within the United States. You think of the large ports in Los Angeles and New York. You think of JFK. Even though we have an international airport here in Salt Lake, a lot of long distance flights have a connection on either coast. And so some of it is just a matter of where we're located within the country. And we do have all of this data that we're happy to share, both these slides and the spreadsheet behind them. So we'll make that available to the EDD.
Yep. And so that sort of leads to the grand reveal then for the overall ranking of the state, right? So if we look at rolling up all of those 6 I's, all of those foundational elements and the evaluation of where those indicators sit, state comes out 3rd overall across the nation, only behind Massachusetts and Colorado. So again, think of just backing up as to overall purpose of this exercise, right? We know that the state has plenty of accolades around economic development and business environment and things. And so, this is looking at really almost the inputs into those, the fundamentals that allow for and grow a healthy business environment. The other thing to think about too, this is a snapshot in time. This is a current moment that this data reflects, knowing that there is additional population growth, economic growth, ongoing, right? Where the pressure is going to be so that the state, either remains at 3, bumps up to 2 or 1, right? It's with the economy, just the dynamic nature, right? This is not a right time to, sit and pat ourselves on the back. This is obviously a great performance. Just thinking about, right, what additional pressures are coming our way and how with the SEDS, the statewide plan, it's an opportunity to really leverage additional resources and address right concerns and issues that we all know still exist, because right, this ranking widely applies to the state, but is felt differently across different parts of the state and even within this region.
Can I ask a question
Yeah,
here?
of course.
Is there any correlation between what I'm seeing as the top 4 or 5 states and general homogeneity? Seems like those states are lacking diversity and they have fairly white populations. Have you found any correlation?
Yeah, we've looked, look, even between a couple of just the eyes and things, right? Looking at like infrastructure and innovation, or right, some of the ones that score a little bit higher on intellectual and innovation, those indicators are a little bit lower on infrastructure and vice versa. So in terms of population diversity and things, we certainly accounted for that in the international, but that is a sort of interesting correlation among some of those top, the darkest blue states. All right, any other thoughts on that? Because the next part of this is the same evaluation, but at the regional level. You've got a handout going out. Oh, that's going to show the regional level. Just before that, this is just a quick breakdown of some of the notable high rankings and some of the notable lower rankings for the state. Again, not totally, this doesn't capture them all, but just big picture wise, thinking about some of the ones that scored the highest. A lot of the innovation and intellectual ones really jump out at the top across the nation, and then the lower ones on the right hand side there, you can see, infrastructure sort of a running theme, but not only regarded to that particular eye. All right, that's okay. All right, I think everyone has got the regional breakdown in front of them. So let me walk you through this a little bit then. So like I said, right, we've got the big picture at the state level with those 6 eyes. And then we did a similar evaluation. Basically, we had to account for some data availability differences, right? Not everything is available at the county level. So we did some adjustments there and then looked at that county level data, rolled that up into the appropriate AOG, and then evaluated that at the AOG level. And so you can see as you read across the row for the Wasatch Front, each eye, we're still playing golf rules here. Lower the number across that green bar, the better. And so overall, that rank for the Wasatch Front comes out as number 2 for among the 7 AOGs.
Can you just back up one slide? For
Yeah.
1 sec? So I'm thinking if I'm, in this meeting and I'm Kirsten or I'm Stephanie or I'm Chris, I'm looking around the room at people who are, or the commissioner, who are county specific.
Mm-hmm.
One of the, I don't know, there's a weird way to say it, but one of the challenges for WFRC is that we represent well more than half of the state's population.
Mhm.
And so to take, this is not a criticism of the work. I'm just saying,
No,
it's just
absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
notable that I think you could do an evaluation like this across the WFRC counties, and what's going to be true in Salt Lake County is going to be very different than what's true in Morgan County, et cetera.
Absolutely.
So I just want to note that as that would have to be considered as we're if we're trying to make decisions about what this means for the WFRC area, we'd have to think about the differences
Absolutely.
across our own region.
That conversation has come up in every region we've visited so far.
Okay.
We do have the data at the county level. And we will provide that to you all. And so that, Morgan County can think about, okay, what does this mean for Morgan? Salt Lake County can think about, what does this mean for Salt Lake County? We chose to keep it at this level for our conversation today because our work is at the regional and state level, and going down deeper kind of muddies our overall effort. But we're happy to provide that data. Thinking at a regional level allows us in a lot of ways to be more competitive for grant proposals. It allows Wasatch Front to perhaps work with MAG or with BRAG and say, these are issues, we're neighbors. These are issues that we share. How can we work across regional boundaries to address those? But at the same time, I know you're all just dying. You're like, okay, what does that mean for my community? And we have that data and we're happy to provide it. And you can use that information however you'd like to use it. We're going to kind of, for the purposes of this exercise, keep it at the regional and up, if that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do the people of southeastern Utah feel like they have the best infrastructure in the state?
We certainly had some conversations about, right, what that means. And again, across the southeastern counties, right, that is reflected entirely, in some cases, very, very differently.
Yeah.
And so it's really, thinking about, interesting, having to think about it as a whole like this, right, and what that means for how to use that when it means such different things to each county and municipality within those counties.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just kind of spot checking this or gut checking.
Right. Gut check, yeah.
Southeastern Utah would paint a very different picture for themselves. And,
Yeah.
and I think most people in Utah would paint a different picture for them because it's not just rural, it's very remote and obviously lacking in many of the things we enjoy here.
Right. I think that highlights the wide diversity within regional areas as well, because Southeast includes Price and it also includes San Juan County, right? And they're very different places. And so, Price, you've got Highway 6, you've got a lot of freight infrastructure, we've got I-70 within that region, but there are pieces of it that are far, far more remote and less connected than others. So point well taken.
All right, just a few more things to point out sort of regionally then, and then I think we want to get into a discussion that really does highlight some of the nuances within the Wasatch Front. On the left-hand side, for people online or who have the handout, that orange box has the 6 eyes organized in range from the highest evaluated to, when I say lowest evaluated, I mean that's relative. So that's sort of your biggest differential, right? So between international and investment, and then you can see right where each of the other 6 eyes falls in there. And then on the right-hand side in the yellow box there, we included some of the notable indicators. So ones that jumped out as either particularly high performing or ones that were on the lower end there. So the ones with the asterisks are the higher evaluated ones. So that first one there is sort of interesting, housing change minus population change. So we looked at those two things, the percentage of housing change and percentage of population change, to see what those rates matched up as. And this region, and I believe one other one that I'm forgetting off the top of my head now, were one of the only ones that had that those two were somewhat in line. They were not, the population change was much higher than housing change in nearly every region. The housing diversity, the occupation diversity in Wasatch Front was particularly high compared to the other regions. The share of the population with a bachelor's degree was particularly high. And then percent of foreign born and the percent of exports compared to other regions certainly stood out. And then you can see those bottom 3 there are the ones that we're on the lower side again, relative to right statewide overall, Utah being third overall, just keeping that in mind. But right, visitor spending, that business creation ratio. So how fast businesses are being created versus them closing. And then that patent technology diffusion.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, of course.
So the rankings are interesting, but I don't interact with each little data point that you
Mhm.
used every day. So I think to me, those are much more valuable than the composite rankings of by category or total. Is that something that will be part of the report, like each metric, how we stack up?
Yes. So
Rather
we-
than like the rank for
Big
the
picture.
international category,
Yeah.
but each metric.
Yep. Yeah, we do
Okay.
have the inputs into basically that composite. Yep, we've got that.
Because you kind
at
of
the
find yourself
AOG.
wondering like which one is bringing us down, right? Is
Right.
it investment in K through 12 or is it,
Right. And ultimately, yeah, like this process is through identifying that, this process is hopefully able to say, right, whether it's, whatever it might be, how do we leverage that? Or on the flip side too, what does the AOG actually have standing over? So, right, there's going to be certain things that sure the AOG has influence over and can advocate for. There are going to be some things that are going to be at the state level or federal level that are just right immovable at a regional level. But to keep in mind, right, if this is the baseline, then here are the things that we can do to work within some of the things that we can't maybe. Any other questions or clarifications before we do open it up into some discussion here?
No, we'll go back and double check some of those numbers that maybe don't quite pass the like initial smell test and figure out why, like the Southeast Utah. So we'll take another look at that one.
And I do think with some of the suggestions that we've got from state or regional data too, I think to make some additions there is going to really add some good context too. Do I see a?
Yeah, and I would just say like even
Yeah.
innovation and I don't know how like a lot is going on around
Yeah.
Hill Air Force Base, for instance.
Yeah.
And what UAMI's doing. And I'm just, is it because there's so much going on down in, Utah County that that's where it's pulling us
Yeah.
down or,
Right.
or is it just a different metric that we are not even looking at from
Right.
a federal level? So.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, this is sort of a good jumping off point to some of the conversation then, because I think, what we want to get from this, keeping in mind, right, some of the caveats with looking at some of these data points, but right, considering, any one of these 6 I's, whether it's international sort of at the top or investment, what are the specific projects that are going on across this region that right apply within your particular realm that apply to right these fundamentals that we need to from a state perspective make sure are represented and included within this plan so that we're able to find the overlap between whether it's MAG or any other AOG, what particular work the EDA grant's a perfect example, right, of innovation that is contributing to the work in there. But curious to hear from other folks on projects that are ongoing that speak to some of these economic fundamentals or where there are gaps in certain projects that, you think would move the needle on, multiple one of these foundations. And this might be the opportunity to leverage some resources for some of those projects.
I just have a comment. About 4 years ago, this is when I was at GoEd, we had a meeting with each one of the counties and we had them bring forward every one of their economic development projects that were substantial to the governor in a form of a document. Had a meeting with all of the counties. And I feel like if we had that information and you cross-referenced it with some of this work, it would be a lot easier.
Yeah.
And I mean, we can reach out to GoEd to find that documentation.
Yeah.
Great. Ariel's reaching for the microphone as well. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we're working really closely with them. And so we can specifically ask that question and say, do you remember when you did this? And how can we cross-reference that with this
Yeah.
and see where there's things that align or things feel a little skewed or off kilter, and then we can dig into it and find out
Yeah,
why.
and provided that was under the Governor Herbert administration, but in reality, in most of these regions, those projects take years.
Yeah,
And so they're probably still
absolutely.
underway.
Yeah.
My mind kind of goes to strategies first. Like I'm still trying to understand how best to translate the data you just presented into more actionable information. And so if you don't mind, maybe kind of sharing your guys's kind of approach to the development of this plan, like we have established strategies in the regional seds. You know, how does kind of what we're envisioning with the current data align with existing strategies? How are we enhancing those strategies for alignment? And then, of course, the projects come after, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a good point. I think last time we were here, actually, we heard a little bit about some of the priority projects that had been advancing or had been successful from the previous said. So there's certainly overlap in the work that you guys have done in that SEDS. I think big picture for us, part of what I think, you know, we've certainly looked at the existing SEDS and know that those are being updated shortly. I think hearing on the ground some of the perhaps realities of what's happening in the SEDS, or maybe what has changed, particularly too since COVID, right? Some of whether it's in work from home, you know, business industry, whatever it might be, some of the adaptation or changes from the SEDS too, we're certainly interested to hear about. But I think, right, again, big picture, taking, you know, what we hear today in terms of challenges too, to these particular foundations, we've heard quite a bit of overlap. I'm thinking inland port is a topic that has come up quite a bit. So just using that as an example to say, right, that's got overlap in multiple AOGs, state potential resources there. So finding those commonalities between the regions too, to help piece together eventually those projects to support the bigger ideas.
I have a general comment or reaction. So when I think about the SEDS in general and the statewide SEDS, and the fact that, you know, a lot of this work is being done through Association of Governments, and the EDDs often, you know, relate to that form of government. Where I'm headed is that I think a big audience of these products are local government and county government. And so if to the extent that is true, then it leads me to ask the question, well, what are the levers that those units of government have available to them? What are the things they can do that address the weaknesses or strengthen the strengths? And that's not all of them, right? So, for example, maybe those forms of government have less to do with the educational system, as an example. And so that's just where my head is going a little bit. And that would be one way to kind of figure out, well, which are the pieces of this that we should focus on within the SEDS, which is, again, you know, my thinking is we think about who the key audiences are that might be utilizing the SEDS as part of that.
Thanks, Ted. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Ultimately, right, we've got limited resources and multiple priorities, and to really hone in on those factors that whether it's AOG or county has standing over, that's where the impact is going to come. The greatest impact is going to come.
I'll make a comment that I think the SEDS last year, and I'm assuming it's the same kind of theme this year. The challenge, I believe, in our regional economy, I'm mainly more aware of Weber Davis County, but Salt Lake County too. And our strength is talent and the workforce. And what's slowing us down now, and maybe it's probably good in a way, is a lack of talent. And what attracts talent is what these cities and counties can do with the transportation and density and quality of life in these areas. So while other macro things like international transportation and those kinds of things aren't at the city and county level, the housing and the transportation planning that's part of Wasatch Front is a critical piece of attracting the talent and continuing that foundational best that we have in the United States.
Good point.
I don't disagree with that statement, but I really want to talk about infrastructure because that's a serious issue in Weber County. We probably spend 90% of our day talking about infrastructure needs and how to fund infrastructure, we're in the process of looking at consolidating some of our infrastructure up in our Ogden Valley. Right now, I'm working with the state and as well as Chris Roybal and his team with Northern Utah Economic Alliance to literally put in a sewer system out in West Weber Corridor in order to accommodate the 3,000 acre mega site that we're working on. So I absolutely agree with some of those micro issues like workforce development, housing, but until you have solid infrastructure in place, we can't even begin to address some of those other issues. And that really is our biggest challenge. It's what we spend a majority of our time focused on here in Weber County.
Thanks, Stephanie. Rick?
And that would include roads as well as, water, sewer, roads, just your basic stuff. It's a real handicap for us. And we have so many developable pieces of property that are really in high neglect of having significant viable infrastructure.
Yeah, the one aspect I would ask or add is, or question first, if there was within the subcategories of all the I's, was workforce reflected? And to add to Guy's comment and then add to Stephanie's comment, we can't even have infrastructure without talent. And so it's a situation that, somewhere workforce needs to be reflected, because as we know, there are a lot of other factors that influence the workforce. But at the same time, we really need talent to get infrastructure. And, I'm not sure who was on the last couple of both the White House and Skills Coalition put out. They had briefs on the bipartisan infrastructure bill coming out and all the opportunities that, cities, counties, colleges, consortiums will have to write for that. And there's going to be a significant amount of money coming out in the near future through all the different agencies, but we have to be able to position ourselves. And a lot of that money goes for talent development, but we need people to develop to have talent. It's a vicious cycle.
It is a vicious cycle, and you also need housing for those people, and housing requires water and sewer and electricity and roads too. So it's a chicken and egg scenario. I think we're in a really unique position to do some strategic planning in this area and to prioritize specific projects and areas that maybe have not had the statistical data to support development, but that are going to be in a position that they could show that. We're, with the West Weber Corridor for us, for example, we're trying to get some road improvements, but we don't have the stats to garner any real interest in developing out there. But if we don't have the road improvements, we can't have the development. So that's really where we tend to kind of chase our tails in this region a lot, I think. And the same thing goes with workforce development. You got to have a place for these people to live and to work.
Just to clarify my comment, I was saying that is local. That is what Wasatch Front's SEDS will do, is to support this conversation that Stephanie's raising. And that's a local topic more than it's a state or national topic to resolve those issues. So absolutely agree with everything.
And just sticking on that topic of whether it's infrastructure or housing, although, you could classify housing as infrastructure too, right? The hurdles in terms of financing for most of those projects, right, is far greater than any one county or municipality can put forth. And so, right, a lot of our conversations in some other regions have revolved around public-private partnerships, right? And whether the private sector in any capacity, right, has stepped into the role of whether it's gap financing or, right, there's many different models for that to go in. But I'm just curious about the private sector role in any of these major categories that we've been talking about, or conversations about enhancing that, or whether that is the right, direction in the future.
So I wanted to speak to the earlier comment about, Ted's comment about audiences being at the county and local level. And I think we're just really interested in seeing your Salt Lake County specific numbers to understand how that integrates with some of our early workforce development programs. And we're working on kind of countywide strategy in cooperation with a lot of stakeholders who are involved in WFRC as well. And then your second question about gap financing and public-private partnerships is the world I live in, where I do a lot of TIF work for Salt Lake County as well. And so that's always a question for us, is what are the sources of available funding? And, at what point is it appropriate for the county to step in as a taxing entity and contribute money? What are we asking those private developers or those private agencies to work on as well from their end? And how do you sort of come to a messy agreement in the middle? So that's definitely of interest to us on everything that we work on, and, figuring out how to pay for it is always the last, the last piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. I don't know if there's anything on the, I'm just thinking about, we were talking about the infrastructure, federal funding a little bit, and broadband. I don't know if there's anything to share on the work that the state's doing on that potential distribution.
Yeah, I can give a quick update. So for those of you who don't know, I'm helping kind of quarterback, for lack of a better term, the state's response to the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And there is a lot of funding that's available for a lot of different things. One, while we were talking, I added a column to my spreadsheet tracking all of this for those grant programs that have workforce development component pieces in it. And so we'll be able to filter and sort for those, because that's a conversation that's come up across the nation. I meet periodically with my peers from other states, and that's a big topic. In terms of broadband, the Wasatch Front is pretty well connected in terms of broadband. But if you think of like a piece of Swiss cheese, there are holes every now and then. And sometimes in a very well-developed neighborhood, there will be a cul-de-sac that for some reason isn't served, but everywhere else around them is. And so we're trying to identify where those are. The amount of funding that we receive from these programs for broadband really depends on the number of unserved or underserved areas in our community. And so there's a lot of money potentially coming. And if your SEDS or the statewide SEDS project might identifies, oh, this is an area where, we really need to work on getting more fiber in the ground, then we have the ability to leverage this document against those federal dollars to maximize the investment. The same goes for transport, roads, bridges, and highways, public transportation funding. There's a lot of opportunities within there. Water, I heard that mentioned from Weber County. There's a lot of funding for water and sewer lines in there as well.
I've got a kind of question, well, not a question, but really just a comment on that. There's so much federal funding. I think one thing that is challenging for us, at least in Tooele County, but I think many other places across the state and region, is just the organizational capacity to take on that federal funding. Federal funding specifically is just like if I think about Tooele, who's working on grants? It's just me, So among all the other things.
So you've got it covered, no problem.
Yeah, I sure do, but there's just so much to take on there. I really appreciate WFRC's efforts on the Safe Streets for All. To do that collaboratively, I think is a big effort and a big deal. So I think opportunities that we can identify, maybe broadband is one of them, where we could work on it at an AOG level, is excellent, because that just helps so much in Tooele, at least, and in my role there, and I think in many other places. So, and then, how do we build organizational capacity? I guess it comes down, maybe it is kind of a chicken and the egg thing again, right? Okay, we need more stronger, budget bases in our municipalities, right? So there's that sales tax and there's that retail, it kind of depends based on the community. And so I think that's again where we have to dig down deeper into the data, more granular, because Tooele County is different than Salt Lake County and Summit County within this AOG. And so kind of understanding, okay, what are our actual weak points compared to the rest of the AOG would be very interesting for us. And that really helps us understand then, okay, how can we lift this AOG? How can we lift ourselves up? And it's through a better understanding of that data, I think. So thank you.
Yeah,
I've got a question about path forward.
sure.
You're probably going to get to path forward, right?
That's okay. Go
Okay,
ahead.
but is the like the primary objective of developing the statewide vision, is it to aggregate upward the needs and priorities that exist at the regional or even the county or local level into broader strategies that can be applied across the whole state? Or like, here are the top strategies for Utah to pursue going forward? Or is it meant to sort of go the other direction? Because a lot of the conversation we've had here is like, what does Morgan County need to do? What does Tooele County need to do? What does Salt Lake County need to do? Which is more of a pushing downward, that this effort, we would take this data and then it would be utilized at the more local level. So I guess I'm trying to get it, like, what's the orientation? Is it ground up to broader strategies, or is it downward, or both? Both.
You know the
Okay.
answer. It's both, of course, right? So we have some high level strategies created by the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission that, we want to say, okay, how does the startup state relate to Wasatch Front Regional Council's regional goals? And so I think there's some of that top down and what we put together in terms of this process, in terms of overall goals that we would like each region to sort of embody within their own SEDS planning process. I think our timeline is a little ahead of the regional SEDS planning process. And so sequentially, this will sort of happen first in some ways, and then you can build that down into your own regional SEDS. But at the same time, we don't want it to be top down. We want it to be bottom up as well. And so we want these conversations here to help identify what some of those local strategies might be that we can then roll up, and we can say, boy, Wasatch Front Regional Council really wants to work on infrastructure. And guess what? So does this other region. So can we work cross region to leverage our efforts and make more happen? Does that help? It's a little bit of both. And then in terms of next steps, what we'll do with this information is we'll take all of your feedback, we'll continue to refine this data, we'll look at the statewide strategies and come back to you all with some draft goals and objectives and kind of some recommendations. And you may say, okay, Wasatch Front is interested in these 3 things, and MAG is interested in these other 3 things, and 2 of them are the same, but there's overlap there, but not all. And so we'll pick which areas the individual regions want to focus on, and then you can take that down into your own sets, if that makes sense. But we're inventing this as we go along, right? And so if you have really strong feelings about how that should happen, we're all ears. So, we'd love to, this is your planning process as much as it is the state's, right? It's ours. So we want to workshop it together.
May I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Within this process, Morgan County, within this process, there are smaller communities, rural counties that have very particular issues that other counties may not have, but have become a huge priority that may be just lost in the general data collection, but doesn't allow us as a smaller community to make it over the hump. Is there a way within this process for you to identify something that's a priority for a smaller community or smaller counties to put that as a set aside to say, we have 4 counties that have this very large issue, and it may not rise the data collection component to something that may set off an alarm, but it's something we need the state to address to kind of move this forward so these counties can overcome this particular issue. You know, maybe it's a water issue or maybe another issue. Is there a way within this process to identify something like that?
In short, yes. With the data that we've got to that went into the right sort of evaluations that you're seeing, much of that was collected at the county level. So we're able to see some of those nuances, and we're happy to share that, right? To be able to point out, right, some of those, what might be stark differences between some of the counties in the AOGs, and be able to point out, right, whether it's, maybe it is 1 county or maybe it's 3 of the 4, whatever it might be, right? To still sort of work regionally, where it makes sense. That's certainly, I mean, part of what we hope to accomplish in this too, right? It's not to look at the region as one sort of entity with one characteristic across all of it. That's, you know, we know it's not realistic and not the case on the ground. Is there something in particular from Morgan County that you wanted to share, that whether it's in infrastructure or any other category that you wanted to make sure is reflected?
Well, yes. And again, Stephanie kind of touched base on this, but it's the housing component and the ability to have a workforce. But we have a unique position. Our population doesn't necessarily always have a social economic, challenge, but we have an issue with water infrastructure and land costs that makes it very difficult to build housing. And so how would we go about working with the state to prioritize a process to help us move that forward? So again, housing probably is our largest challenge for our workforce, but we have the challenges of water, et cetera, so on, so infrastructure.
Well, and if
But
I could add,
I'm sorry, could I add really quickly?
oh yeah, please.
The challenge that we have may be the same, but the solution may be drastically different. And that's kind of what my question is. To be lumped into a large urban population that has the same challenge, to come up with a solution that works for them but may not work for a rural community. That's what my question was kind of trying to work its way towards. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And I think the advantage of working on this statewide document may allow us to say Morgan County has this issue, and so does Tooele, or so does San Pete County. You know, we may find other counties throughout the state that have similar challenges, and that may not be within your same region, where we could work on tackling issues together. So yeah, I think our hope is to be able to have this plan be flexible and nimble enough to speak to those nuances, while at the same time kind of advancing the whole state.
You know, Laura, that if I can just add one other thing that made me think too, there's always going to be unforeseen challenges. You know, Stockton in Tooele County, they had a large fire, and as a result of that, they had a failure of their water system, right? It would be wonderful if the SEDS could like somehow have the strategies that assist with unforeseen, that was a natural disaster. It could be other things, there could be economic, like unforeseen things too. If there's ways to just address and prepare for kind of unforeseen challenges too, I think, how do we do that? I don't know, but just food for thought, I guess. Thank you.
That element of resiliency, both economic and environmental, is huge.
Now, there's also one more thing along with the smaller communities.
Yeah.
And as James mentioned, it's the areas, I mean, we're small. Numbers will never match for us. And then we also have the other problem is how do we support that? Not support it, but how do we get the financial backing to be able to take care of those things? So like if we want a bridge fixed, we don't necessarily have the millions of dollars to do that, because then we'd all be taxed out of our homes. And so the economic development is a big, big factor, but, I mean, there's a lot of challenges. We have more than what the major population areas have. And just thoughts.
Okay, one more thought. Sorry, I'll stop
No, you're
talking
fine.
soon. But so often at the state level, I think they look at the class of a county, right? And if you're rural or urban, right? Tooele's like on the edge sometimes. We're a county of the third class, which makes us urban often. But then there's communities like Stockton and Vernon and, even like Dugway, very isolated, very rural, that then can't necessarily access some of the resources, right? So I think if there's ways that we could provide flexibility, like for smaller communities that don't abut larger communities, if you're under 10,000 in population, maybe you should be able to access a particular grant too, or something, even though you're not in, I don't know. Maybe that's a very Tooele specific issue, but it's a
No, and
challenge.
it's not. In fact, we were in Monticello yesterday down in San Juan County, and the very same thing came up. And they said, boy, we're a fifth class county, and we're so limited in our resources. And Grand County is a sixth class county, but they have so many resources. They have so much money because of MOAB. And so they're like, these classifications, even though maybe we have more people overall, we're in a really different playing field. And so I think that could be one of the types of recommendations that comes out of this is look at those nuances and maybe as we're offering grant resources, don't just base it on these established classifications that may not always make sense.
May I add one more? I think,
Of course.
I think there'd be tremendous value in identifying your growth centers. And so, I don't want to say this because I don't want Commissioner Fackrell to throw something at me, but Morgan could be identified as a growth center opportunity, Box Elder Growth Center, Utah County, Tooele. And as our population grows out, we want to grow it correctly. We want to have our infrastructure built correctly. We want to have our big eye for investment from a state level planned well for those communities. And it may behoove the state to do some early identification of where population is going to grow to, and then help those communities to grow in a manner that makes sense, this plan growth concept. Because to Commissioner Fackrell's point, many of those communities right now do not have the financial wherewithal to have the planning that they need, the professional adeptness to do infrastructure. And so from a statewide level, it may make sense for some of this growth to be identified and the state create within the plan some assistance to make sure it's done in a manner that moves the state forward rather than creates issues and problems into the future.
Great. Thanks, James, for that comment. One of the things too, as we think about, right, how whether it's these indicators or thinking about how, right, some of this data affects different parts of the region differently. And in some cases, municipalities or counties are going to just relate to it quite differently. Right. The other thing I think about is minority businesses and thinking about, right, certain access or ability to access education or access business resources is obviously different to different people. And I'm curious, right, as we look at trying to create an equitable business opportunities and across the region, whether it's in some of the indicators or topics that we've talked about, just thinking about how that might apply in this round of the SEDS or regionally, or again, within each of the individual counties. Any thoughts around specifics or resources that are in need to be supported there, again, at the state level or otherwise?
Yeah, I could touch on that one for a minute. I wanted to speak on what James and Blaine said as well, but from an urban perspective, we're talking about those growth zones. The west side of Salt Lake County is one of them in a completely different way. Single family homes are being purchased and constructed into multi-story, multi-use facilities. And at the same time, that's where the majority of our minority business owners and just the minority populations live in general. So if we're talking about this stuff in a bigger picture, it's fascinating to me to see how these different EDDs are designed, or EEDs are designed, and because they are so different, right? Morgan and a water issue in Stockton can kind of relate. Sugar House and Immigration Canyon, well, maybe Immigration Canyon, but Sugar House and downtown Salt Lake City, it's the same issues. We're still going to have infrastructure issues. We're still going to have potential water issues. We're still going to have these things, but they look completely different. And I have no idea what that means in terms of next steps for planning appropriately.
I just want to make sure we're scheduled till 3:15, right?
Right.
Okay. Go ahead, Kirsten.
The risk of being a broken record, I would just say adding some of that access to opportunity or economic opportunity factors would be really crucial to your question about how the SED can be adapted for maybe weeby kind of business, like minority and women-owned business or whatever it is.
But I didn't know if anyone else said that acronym. MWBE, like maybe weeby, like.
Weeby.
Yeah. I didn't know. That was just a thing that I said in my head.
One other thing, if I may.
Of course.
One thing I think, the urban aspect is, city. I know Stockton, Tooele, Morgan. We do want to try to stay rural also.
Right.
And so we need to have that support. It's either that or you support us all the time with all your money, or we build this project. And trying to keep into it an aspect of not making it a Salt Lake City. And so that's something I think in economic development, whether it be different kinds of economic development, that's what I hope you can try to bring out even in your questioning, because I think I went through it and for my business, and it's agriculture. And so, you need to look at that. I hate to say it, I'm older than almost everybody in here. And I remember the days when Salt Lake County, you could go out and you could go to a farm in Salt Lake County, and you could go and pick your produce, you could pick your whatever it might be. So I think when you're looking at, as James was mentioning, the centers, where do you want to have those different kinds of city type economic development? So I think that's something you need to look at in all of this planning is, how is it going to affect everybody else? And why did they go to those areas like Tooele, Squaw Valley, all those areas out there? Why did they go there? Why did they come to Morgan? Why did they go to Sanpete County? Why did they go to Axtell, or to Fayette? Those areas, I went through them yesterday. So those are the things that we have to look at. I mean, I was looking at, oh boy, yeah, we could have a lot of development down here in this county if our county looked like that. But, you have to look at your areas. So I'm just giving you a perspective from the rural standpoint, but yet we're right next to Salt Lake.
Yeah, the scale, intention has come up a couple of times, but the scale of economic development or rate of investment has to match the characteristics and
that's right.
of the surrounding region.
Can I add one comment on that note too?
Yeah, of course.
Key to Tooele City's economic development strategy is, culture and heritage and preservation of those and development of those aspects of the community so that people can kind of improve their quality of life. The Downtown Alliance we have, right? We are investing in historic structures. We're looking for grants for those. That's a different type of economic development, but so important to a community too. And each community, I think if you talk about culture and heritage, like, you know, you still have that in Salt Lake, and it's just a different type of, you know, so maybe there's strategies that can fit within a culture and heritage, you know, theme in SEDS too.
Let me add to that real quickly as well. Salt Lake County actually does that within their economic development planning. We're a part of, we being the Swazo Center, and some of the other minority business resource centers like the identity chambers, and some of those folks are very active with the county in economic development, trying to continue that conversation of what does that look like in terms of this kind of growth. When we look at the raw numbers, if we go out 10 or 15 years from now, it looks totally different than it looks in 35 or 40 years. The Latino population is almost doubling at a rate twice as fast as anybody else. Between 2010 and 2020, the white population lost 3% in the overall census. And 25% of our existing population accounted for 50% of the growth, majority of that coming from the Latino and Hispanic communities. A lot of that growth within these different districts and regions also plays into what we thought we were planning in 2000 or 2010 versus what we're now planning in 2020 moving forward to 30, 40, 50. I think one of the things I was hinting on earlier in terms of that rural versus urban growth is we're all growing. We're all going to continue to grow. If the population center is Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County, yes, we're moving out to Morgan and Tooele and some of the other areas within this set, but we're also moving up. There's just not enough room in general for where all these people are coming from. I'm positive by 2030 we'll have a 5th congressional district, and by 2040 we'll probably have a 6th. And those are things that we need to look at when we're talking about how fast are we actually growing. I know we talk about it here, and I know Envision Utah talks about that every time they meet. And I think the number, if we were to graph some sort of an economic growth chart or population growth chart from an economics perspective, I think it's going to be faster than we're actually anticipating right now. I saw this stat, this is going to be kind of bizarre, but bear with me. I saw these numbers a couple weeks ago. I heard these numbers a couple weeks ago. I looked them up just 2 days ago. The median age for white people is like 47, but the mode is 53 in the US. And the mode is the number of people, right? So there are more 53-year-olds in the white population than anything else. In the Latino population, the median age is, I think, 39, so it's a little bit lower, but the mode is 11. And that's extremely significant when we talk about this growth. Not much of that growth is in migration. It's native foreign growth. So when we're looking at these populations, and this is why I'm thinking about things like the west side of Salt Lake County. It's a huge Latino population, and that's the population that's growing. And in 40 years, or 30 years, when that mode goes from 11 to 41, and this is who's the majority of people having new children and then continuing to grow. I mean, it's, to think about it from a demographics perspective is mind-boggling to me.
I'm really glad my kids are in a Spanish immersion school program.
I just want to, let me just really, I'm going to try to bring this home in 4 minutes. So I think one of the things that you've recognized, and maybe some of you around the table, many of the other AOGs actually drive the economic development in their areas. Where in here we have each of the counties driving their own economic development. We have a lot of the cities driving their own economic development. And so, and then we've also got, the chamber doing innovation networks, and the UAMI's doing their, everybody's, we've got quite a few different hands, into economic development in our region. And so that's really fun that we all are sitting around the table and talking about this, because I think we could do this in a vacuum and we would sorely fail. I think one of the things that it's going to be important, one, for your process and also for us, is to see that data. I mean, I think, being able to get it out and have people kind of scrutinize it and saying, hey, does this make sense? And obviously it's not going to make as much sense for Morgan County as it is, not make much sense. It's maybe not going to be the same sense from Morgan County as it is maybe Salt Lake County. But I think that's what's going to start driving not only our regional SEDS, which is really, really what I was trying to get at earlier, is this future thinking. How can we do this differently? How can we have measurable goals and measurable impacts? Because you're right, if we maybe look at an innovation center on the west side of Salt Lake County or Salt Lake City, that's going to have a really measurable impact. And that's a pie in the sky kind of thing. That's going to have a different measurable impact than maybe something in that kind of same innovation center and as in maybe Morgan County. And so where we want to go with it, and I think with the regional SEDS, is to really bring those measurable impacts and really making a difference and bringing, as Andrew said, bringing our ideas up to the state side with a foundation of the 6 eyes that we have, and having that be kind of our maybe directional or functional or foundational direction coming down. And then all of the above then the UEOC gets to say, okay, we're going to put our money where our mouth is and put some money in towards infrastructure. And how do we do that? So we're going to bring it down and say, okay, regional SEDS, what does it say? We need some stuff out in Weaver County and West Weaver. And so I think it's all going to work. I'm trying to make sense of it in my head. Sounds like a big jigsaw puzzle right now, but I really, I think we've got the right people at the table talking about the right things. And anything else?
I think I keep thinking about that up and down lens, and I keep looking around the room at the folks here who are geographically specific, and we have with us all the county leads, right? I mean, Jared, Kirsten, Kent, James, Stephanie, for each of the counties. And not right now, but I think it would be really helpful. I mean, you guys tell me if you agree with this. I think it would be helpful to us in doing the regional SEDS, and also to GOPB and Camoin and putting the statewide SEDS together. If each of the county economic leads ask themselves the question and then shared the answer of what would be helpful as you're thinking about your county priorities and needs to have emphasized in the regional SEDS and in the statewide SEDS. And, Stephanie was identifying issues. I mean, all of you were identifying issues, and they're going to be different. And I'm not saying that to exclude any city or private organization or whatever. It's just geographically easier to say, hey, each of the county economic development leads, what would be helpful to what's happening in your area to emerge in and be emphasized in the regional SEDS and the statewide SEDS. Okay, so I guess I'm looking, does that resonate with you, Laura? That
I
would be
love
helpful?
it. And I think it would be very helpful both to you all as you're developing yours and ours, make sure we hit on the key points. So yeah, I think that's something we could send out to all of the EDDs as a follow-up.
And I think I'm building, Ginger, to some extent, I'm building off of what you said before. Like, I think I'm getting at something slightly different than, Kent, what's the top project in Davis County? What I'm sort of getting at more is, what are the, strategies that are really important to Davis County that you think you want to have emphasized regionally and from the whole region and from the whole state? And then if we do that, and Laura, that's where it may pop that, my gosh, what X county and Y county and Z county across the state need is very similar. We've got to emphasize that. And then projects can fit into those areas of emphasis as we go forward. I don't know, I'm kind of looking around to the county folks to see, like, does that make sense?
Maybe Andrew, I can jump in. I appreciate that comment. You were part of a growth discussion that we had recently in Davis County and made the comment that Cameron Deal always says the one size misfits all, right? We've all got our unique challenges. I think having an opportunity to express those as a county to this group would be helpful. You know, I think about our challenges, it's land availability and diversity and inclusion. Those are some that rise quickly to the top that may be not the same exact challenges that everyone's running into. And so, yeah, I would appreciate that opportunity.
Cool, thanks.
Second.
So, okay, thanks, James. And Kirsten just nodded yes. Thanks, Kirsten.
I agree also.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Question for me, not that I'm a county person, but so recently I've seen reports from the Department of Workforce Services economists. They have good economic data on what types of businesses are doing well and growing in the MSAs anyway. I don't know if they can do it by county, but also I've seen a lot of demographer data. Is that all available on your website, or how can, because I don't know if the counties have all the information to see what's coming at them down the road, because I think what Edward was suggesting before is an interesting set of information, and is that I think the Gardner Institute has good reports on demographics, but I don't know if it's at the data at the county level or not.
We actually just had a presentation from the Gardner Institute that was very Davis County specific. It's one of the first in the last couple of years that I've seen focused solely on Davis County. And so I believe a lot of that information does exist through ChemC.
Thanks, Guy. I'll follow up with that and see if we can push that out too. Just quick other business, if we're ready to move on, just other business, our next official meeting is December 14th at 1:30. We may change that to 1:15 just to let people get here and be a front runner if you want to come down here. But look to maybe for some ad hoc committee meetings to start the SEDS process, if the 5-year regional SEDS process. I have to say it like that in order to distinguish between the two. So
Thank you very much for all the work you're doing for the whole state and traveling all over the state to try to make sense of, you know, and you come to one AOG and you hear, well, here's what we need in the urban area and here's what we need in the rural area. And that we're just one AOG. So thanks for what you're doing. Is there any sort of like, now here's what's going to happen, quick summary that you want to offer?
Just plan on seeing us again in January. Plan on seeing us again in January. And we're hoping to make that sort of a workshop of implementation strategies. So really focusing on, okay, here are the things that have emerged from the conversations. Now, what do we do about it? How do we actually implement that? So that's what's coming next. And also I wanted to point out that one of Alex's colleagues at Camoin happened to be a former GPI employee, Gardner Policy Institute. So we've got good access to that information.
The Utah Insight. And so we'll follow up with that business survey link as well, just to do a second round of surveys with that. And we will share all of that information as it becomes available and we start to analyze all of that as well. We really appreciate all of your time today. Thank you.
thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,